everyone. I am Ayush, representing Voices from the Periphery, and it's both a profound privilege and a heartfelt honor to welcome you all to today's much anticipated lecture on religion and the empire in Portuguese Goa. This gathering is especially significant as we are deeply fortunate to be joined by one of the most distinguished scholars in the field of early modern colonial history, Professor Ângela Barreto Xavier. Her gracious presence today not only enriches our discourse but also inspires us to think more critically about the complex intertwinement of power, religion, and resistance. Dr. Xavier is a historian of exceptional calibre whose pioneering scholarship has reshaped how we understand Portuguese colonialism, particularly in South Asia. Born in Margao, Goa, she pursued her academic journey in Portugal, completing her studies in history and art history, followed by a master's in political and cultural history at the new University of Lisbon. She went on to earn her Ph.D. in history and civilization from European University Institute in Florence in 2003. Currently, Dr. Xavier serves as a senior researcher at the Institute of the Social Science (ICS) at the University of Lisbon. Her academic journey has been globally enriching, having served as a visiting scholar at Harvard University and as Maître de Conférences Invitée the École des Hautes Études et Sciences Sociales in Paris. She also continues to nurture intellectual exchange in Goa as the Joaquim Heliodoro Cunha Rivara Chair Professor at Goa University. Her research focuses on the intricate nexus of power, religion, and knowledge within early modern empires. In her landmark works, there's a very wonderful book, Religion and Empire in Portuguese India, Conversion, Resistance, and the Making of Goa, which came 2022, and her first book, Catholic Orientalism, Portuguese Empire, Indian Knowledge, 16th to 18th century, co-authored with Inês de Paul. She presents nuanced and deeply researched perspectives that center the voices of local actors and interrogate dominant colonial narratives. In 2021, her contributions were honored with the prestigious Infosys Prize in Humanities, recognizing her meticulous and layered analysis of conversion and violence in the Portuguese imperial context. Beyond her written scholarship, Dr. Xavier had actively led and participated in numerous research initiatives on legal pluralism, public rituals, and acts of resistance within colonial frameworks, bridging disciplines and building dialogues that are both critical and collaborative. Dr. Ângela Xavier's works continues to serve as a vehicle for historians, scholars, and students alike, reminding us that to engage with the past is also understand the complexity of our present. Now, to ma'am, we are truly honored to have with our ma'am. Up to you, ma'am.
Well, thank you so much for your generous, too much generous, and you are raising expectations, and I feel a bit humble too. So, but thank you to Voices from Periphery, and namely to Palab and Ayush for inviting me to be present here today, and I hope I can. Well, I'm going to share with you my thoughts, and I hope that they can be useful for your work. And I don't know you. I don't know who is listening to me. So I know that you are mainly students from master and doctoral programs, and and feel comfortable also to make questions while I'm speaking, because if there is something that is not clear enough, and so please just do it. I have a PowerPoint, but before sharing it, I just want to say 2 or 3 words. So what I'm trying to do with my work is as much as possible to not take a position either for the colonizers or for the colonized. So because I do believe that these violent processes, because they were violent, but anyway, both groups were very complex and interacted and shaped each other in a way. So, and when I work on Portuguese colonialism, and namely Portuguese colonialism in Goa, my first question is, how is it possible that it was so long, the Portuguese presence in Goa? Because it was almost 500 years since the Portuguese were very few. They were really, in the beginnings, hundreds of people. So demographically, compared to the people living in Goa, there were really, really very few. How is it possible that these very few people were able to control politically this territory for so long? So, and in my answer to that, and that's about this that I want to speak today, is that religion and conversion to Christianity had a very strong impact and a very heavy role in the preservation of the Portuguese rule in Goa. So I'm speaking mainly about Goa, but in the final slides, I will just try to refer to the different ways how Catholicism was implemented in India under the Portuguese umbrella, because it was not only in Goa, as you know very well. So if you allow me now, I would start sharing the in a different way, so I can explain better what I'm doing. And let me put the clock working, because I usually speak too long and I don't want to bother you too much. So let's share this. Okay, so I think you are looking at this first slide, and I put these pictures, two pictures. One is from the 16th century, another is from the 18th.
Ma'am, sorry to interrupt you, but that screen is not the entire screen, ma'am.
Oh,
Do you share
sorry?
it or not? It's not the entire screen, ma'am. Do you share it, or it's like this?
Oh, well, okay. I thought that it was. Let's see. So it's not in full screen, is what you are saying?
Yes, ma'am. It's not full screen, ma'am.
Okay, interesting. But before it was, wasn't it?
Yes, ma'am, but it's not. Now
Okay,
it's not.
let's see. Just let me know. It's not yet.
No, ma'am, it's not yet, ma'am.
Okay. What can I do? But it's interesting, huh? Before it was working and now it's not working. Let's see again. Okay, so I will bring again the PowerPoint, okay?
Okay, ma'am.
Now I lost my, oh my God, what did I do? I'm doing something wrong here.
Well, let me just share the screen from the upper arrow. Then it will come again. The upper arrow, beside the three dots, ma'am.
Yeah, yes. I know. Let's see. The problem is that now I lost my, okay, let's see again.
Yeah, otherwise I can also share the PPT, ma'am.
Can you do it?
Okay, just let me check, ma'am.
Because now I lost the thing from my, that's very strange. Yeah, but if you share, that's more complicated because I cannot decide how to do it, right?
Yes, ma'am, but is it visible, ma'am?
Yes, it is. Okay. Yeah, it's more complicated because I cannot move it, right? You have to move it.
Let's try, ma'am, one more time with your computer.
Yes, I'm going to try once again. Okay, let's see. Now I'm going here. Again here. Okay. Okay, and now let's see. I will try once If it doesn't work, doesn't work.
Yes, ma'am. It's done.
Yes, it's okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So sorry for this. So I was just asking you to look at these two images. One is from the 16th century, another is from the last years of the 18th century, and somehow they show this transition from many locals from a certain way of behaving and dressing themselves to another way that was more Western-like way. So, and this is, in a way, synthesizes a bit the social and cultural impact of this alliance between religion and empire in Portuguese India. So, so this is the idea. I have three parts in this talk. The first is making sense of the context, because we cannot understand what happened in Goa during this period without understanding first how was the social organization of Goa. And that was a difficult task for me to recover, to reconstruct as much as possible what could have been Goa prior to the Portuguese arrival. And that's because the Portuguese in the 16th century, unfortunately, destroyed many of the documents that existed, majority, almost all documents that existed in this region and produced locally. So we don't have the books that existed in the temples and other types of documents, they almost all disappeared. So it's a really difficult task to recover the context when the Portuguese arrived, in order to understand how these people, because one of the things I tried to do is to think about, well, these were the people living in a certain place, and the Portuguese were, actually, they were the foreigners, they were the others, okay? So that's what I tried to do in my work, to understand how the locals were behaved before the encounters with the Portuguese, the imperial encounters, and how this social organization, social and cultural organization was received and appropriated in this case, Catholicism and the Portuguese imperial rule. So that's what I'm going to do it very fast now. I will show you some 4 or 5 slides with information on what was Goa. For maybe you are not so familiar with that because you belong to another part of India, another region. So just to give you this sense of the context and of the villages of Goa between the 16th and 18th centuries. Considering two things. First, this is a very micro space in India, okay? Goa is very, very small. But what I found for the 16th century was that there was also a lot of heterogeneity in Goa. It was not an homogeneous region. And that leads me also to think about what was India in this period. Now, that's another question. How was India? If this very small place was so heterogeneous, how was the rest of India? It's just to remember that Goa was part of the Chalukya Empire, the Western Chalukya Empire, and with this dynasty of the Kadambas during this period. So it was a territory that was vassal of the Chalukya Empire. But it was also a territory that was under the influence, the cultural influence of the Chalukyas, and also the normative influence of the Chalukyas. Also, during this context, there were lots of centers of learning where the Vedas, the Dharmasastras, Smritis, Puranas, etc. were studied in the region of Goa. So we have that information, and which means that well, there was this cultural and intellectual life ongoing in this medieval period, okay? And this is an important point, which is there were different rules in Goa, in this small territory between the 10th to the 15th, 16th century. And that makes these different rules that superimpose one after the other, these create many layers that are also political, administrative, cultural, and social. So after that, Vijayanagara Empire and then the Bamani Sultanate were also, Goa became, or the territories of Goa became part of these two empires. But when we think of Goa today, not all of the territories that constitute today Goa belong to to the Vijayanagara Empire or the Bamani Sultanate. So also that there was no homogeneity. What we call today Goa was not, all parts were not at the same time under the same rule. So you see, and this had a huge impact on this heterogeneity that I was speaking about. So, but there were what we could call in Hindu influences, strong Hindu influences during the Vijayanagara rule, and also again during this period there was centers of learning established in this small territory. The late 15th, 16th century, we have mainly an Islamic rule in Goa. Goa was, but this Islamic rule, I am talking about heterogeneity and pluralism. And again, the Islamic rule also was characterized by pluralism in this period. So, in Goa, all the territories that we call Goa today, because at this period it was not like that, Goa was, during the Islamic rule, considered part of a territory that was part of the patrimony of the Sultan, because Bijapur Sultanate considered it very important for economic reasons. And during this period, and the previous periods, the heads of the Goan villages were intermediaries between the Sultanate and the local population. So the village elites were brokers. They were the connection between the imperial power or the political power and the locals. And also during this period, during the Islamic period, we can see that the administrative institutions, the officials, either had Persian or Sanskritic words to define them. So, and this shows well also this hybridity that I was speaking before. So 16th century. So we were talking about these Brahmanic centers and two small villages that I don't know if you can see well, but they are in this area of Salsette. There are 2 points, 2 bullets. And these were 2 villages, Kanshastali and Kalashi, which were centers of knowledge, and where we still have some versions of Mahabharata and Ramayana that were produced in these villages exactly when the Portuguese were arriving. So we know that there was this ongoing cultural and intellectual life in this period when the Portuguese arrived. But this material, well, actually these 2 versions of Mahabharata and Ramayana subsisted because missionaries were able to transcribe them before they were burned by the Portuguese, the originals. But as I was saying, very little things subsisted from this period before the Portuguese arrival. So this is a map just to show you what we have in these in colors that are strong were the territories that were conquered by the Portuguese or annexed by the Portuguese in the 16th century. The middle territory, that was very small, had only around 30 villages and 1 town, the town of Goa. This territory was the one that was conquered in 1510 and continued to be under the Portuguese rule until 1961. So it was a very small, very small territory. And then the two other in a bit lighter gray were annexed by a treaty with the Bijapur Sultanate only in 1543. So it's more about these territories that I'm speaking today, because the other territories that constitute the state of Goa were conquered or annexed in the second half of the 18th century. And these other territories, they were annexed in a period when the idea of converting massively the local populations was not anymore very strong. So this means that the Christianization of these other territories in white, it was much less than the Christianization in the territories that are bold. So today in Goa, we have like 25% of people that are Catholics, but these people are mainly located in these territories that are in gray in this map. But in the second map, it was a map that I was doing, trying to reconstruct the limits of the villages of Goa, which were more or less this in the South territories. It was like 60 villages, in the northern 40, and in the middle territories like 30. So you can see it's very small place, very small place. These are also maps that I was trying to do in order to show to understand the social and religious organizations of Goa. And what I found, and I found this in documents produced by the Portuguese in the mid 16th century. First, these what we can call caste in this period, because as you know, it's a word that has many meanings and that was changing during time. But if we can speak about caste in this period, we can see that the government of the villages, it's the first map on the left, the government of the villages were not, the elites of the villages did not belong all to the same castes. And also, there were some villages where the administration was divided by different castes, so that combined different castes. And this is not, it has some relevance to understand what's going to happen afterwards. And also the two other maps are about the main deities that were in these villages. And it's also another interesting landscape panorama, because you can see that the main female deity, Santeri, you can see the presence of this female deity over all the territory. But when we go to the male deities, then we can see that there is a difference between these territories. You can see that the territories of the north, center and north, you have the main deity is Havalnat, while in the territories of the south, the main deity is Narayana. So this somehow shows you a bit of this heterogeneity that I was speaking before. Here in the mid-16th century, there was this, one of the viceroys of India asked probably an Indian painter to make, to paint the populations that were under Portuguese rule in Asia, and some of the populations of Goa. So here it's like the oldest figures we have, which we don't know how much descriptive they were, but a population that was living in Goa in that period. So just to have a visual idea of what was the type of life, mainly rural, even if in the town of Goa there was commerce of these regions. Okay, so and this is an important point. This phrase I'm putting here, that the old conquest villages were, because this area was considered the old conquests later on, were not the homeostatic centerpiece of timeless tradition. They were not. They were, well, there were lots of changes between the 10th and the 16th century, and they were very dynamic places, either in what concerns the presence of different castes, either in what concerns their religious experience, either also in what concerns the political experience, because they were submitted to different rules. They had to negotiate with different people. And one of my arguments is that this culture of negotiation of these elites, local elites, that were always under different rules, they were never independent, autonomous. This culture, this political culture of the local elites was very important when we want to understand what happened afterwards with the Portuguese conquest. So I was saying in 1510 we have the conquest of these places, and until between 1510 to 1530-40 we have a regime. The Portuguese impose a regime I would call that is more of suzerainty instead of sovereignty. What do I mean by that? Is that mainly the government were given to the locals during this period more than to the Portuguese. So there was a kind of delegation, and the Portuguese obviously were requiring tributes for defense of the territories, but they were not interfering so much. It's not that they were not interfering, but they were not interfering so much in the village life. And this is also important because I have a slide afterwards about the choices that the Portuguese, that the locals had at a certain moment after 1540. And so the first experience that the locals have with the Portuguese is of conquest, military conquest. It's violent, of course, but after that, the local elites had some power. It is also during this period that Afonso de Albuquerque, that was the conqueror of Goa, asked the Portuguese soldiers to marry local women in order to fix people in the new colonies of this area. So, and this strategy of intermarriages was a way of the Portuguese that were very few, as I was telling you, to inscribe their power locally, to territorialize their power, because they were actually very, very few. I would say that also during this period, conversion to Christianity was not very important. It was always present, but it was not the main goal of the Portuguese monarchy. It was more commerce than conversion. And that also explains that the Portuguese in that period were smoother, were negotiating more with the locals than happened afterwards. So now I'm going to move to the second point, that is the mechanics of conversion, because actually during this period, 1530, 1540, there was a huge change in the way how the Portuguese dealt with the local people. So this is in Portugal a very famous painting showing St. Francis Xavier preaching in Goa. The Jesuits were one of the main missionary orders, and they were using very much the conversion in Goa as a way of imposing themselves globally. So they made this cycle of paintings about the life of St. Francis Xavier. And here we have an interesting painting, well, that we cannot say that this was true, but where you can see a mixture of people, of Portuguese-like people Indian-like people certainly of different case because of the way they are dressing, and also children of different types sitting and listening to St. Francis Xavier. So let's go to explain the changing moments. So I was telling you 1530-40 was an important changing moment for the locals and for the Portuguese. And why this happens? There is this pressure. I want you to remind what I was saying before about heterogeneity. So during this period, there is a pressure for homogenizing the territories and the people under Portuguese rule. And this pressure, you can see it in Portugal, as you can see in the territories under Portuguese rule, either in India or then in Brazil or in Africa. So there is this idea that was not in the beginning. I mean, as Catholicism was always a goal, but it was not so connected with the political power. But in this moment, yes, things change dramatically for the Portuguese way of ruling Portugal and overseas territories. And religion becomes crucial for political inclusion and exclusion. And there is this fanaticism by the Portuguese crown and the missionaries that they needed to convert all the people under Portuguese rule in order to keep political power. So that's what happens in Goa in this period. There is this idea that all the Goans had to be converted to Catholicism, because otherwise they would not be loyal to the Portuguese, and the conservation of the Portuguese power there in Goa and in other places in India and Brazil and Africa depended very much on the Christianization and Catholicization, in this case, of their population. And so here we have this very difficult period for the locals, forced Christianization, and this forced Christianization had an interesting consequence, because while before it was the local norms, the legal norms that operated in the villages were mainly the ones that they had inherited from the previous political dominations. From now onwards, with the conversion to Christianity, the locals started to be under the Portuguese law. And that has interesting effects that I'm going to show afterwards. Because for the Portuguese law, in the Portuguese law, there was this idea that conversion and baptism were a kind of generation. The same is to say, the people that converted to Christianity became, at least theoretically, equal to the Portuguese, had the same rights and obligations as the Portuguese have in relation to the Portuguese king. And this is good and bad, as I can show you in a while. Meanwhile, during this period as well, there was this somehow utopian idea that if the landscape was all destroyed, the local religious landscape was all destroyed, then the conversion would be much easier to do. So what happened? There was this systematic suppression of local devotions. The temples were destroyed, the local priests were expelled, and the properties and rents of the temples were transferred to churches. We have in this period these inventories of the lands and rents of the temples, the lands, rents, and objects also. Everything that belonged to the temples, where there was a list of all this information, which is a documentation that is absolutely fantastic, because it allows us, and it was with this documentation that I tried to recover the religious life in Goa before the Portuguese arrival, because they were very systematic. They wanted to know everything that each temple had and possessed, and everybody that was related with the temple. No, all the officers of the temple, the dancers of the temple, etc., etc., etc. So we have a snapshot, a real very good snapshot of the Goan religious life in the mid-16th century before the conversion to Christianity. And it's this period when the missionary zeal is very high, and also when Inquisition was created in Goa in order to control the orthodoxy of the people that have converted to Catholicism. But it's also in this period that, as I told you, that the landscape, the local landscape and the religious landscape was completely changed, transformed in this period, because the temples were destroyed. And on the temples, sometimes on the temples, sometimes not, other infrastructures were constructed, namely churches, but also schools and hospitals. And this is also an important point to refer, because that Catholicized people tended to have a better education than the people that were not, because in every church there was also a school teaching the locals, or not in the same way to all locals, but this was happening. So the legal framing, I was working with this legal framing. That is because this is very important. I was telling you that the people that Christianized were under the Portuguese rule, right? So there are lots of laws, decrees, and provisions to give privileges to people that were converted. As you can see, there was this royal decree in 1542 that expanded the privileges of the Portuguese people to any other people that settled in Goa if they become Christian. So it's this equivalence that I was telling you between Christianism, being Christian, and being Portuguese. And one of the important points that I wanted to stress here was the laws that were giving privileges to women, namely something that women before did not have, was they could now own, the women that Christianized, assess their parents' inheritance and receive more of their parents' inheritance over their non-converted male brothers. You know what this means? This is a complete revolution in the local life, if it happened like that all the time. No, women, and you can see that there is this movement of feminization of Goan Catholicism, because widows were allowed to marry a second time and also to receive part of their husband's inheritance, and girls could inherit their parents' inheritance, all of their parents' inheritance, if their non-converted male brothers, if their brothers were not converted to Christianity. So these laws that privilege Christians were complemented by laws that were discriminatory of the non-Christians, so reducing their local power, social status, and economic health. And this was a way of persuading, if I put this word between commas, the locals to convert, because if they did not convert, namely the elites, they would lose lots of power. And that's in this period that like circa 30% of the locals actually flee to the neighborhood, or to the south, or to Canada, and become also bring, well, there are many Goans that migrate in this period to the neighborhood. But majority of people stayed, actually. And yeah, I have, in this slide, I wanted you to see that, because more or less these were the three local people's choices. And these choices also were related to what had been before this period, the relationship of the Portuguese crown with the local people. As I was telling you, between 1510 until 1530-40, the autonomy of the local people was much bigger than it became afterwards. So, as I was telling you, circa 30%, one thinks, we believe that is more or less this, the number of people that left Goa in this period, left to the lands of Bichapur and abandoned their villages and lands. And what happened? That these lands were redistributed by the people that converted to Christianity. Others, other people, this is a report of a meeting in one of the villages assemblies. Some argue that this new way of the Portuguese to behave with the locals was transitory, was not going to stay. And but then there was, and this is in this report, one of the elders was saying that it was better to become Christians soon, for sooner or later they would be. And they were saying that the missionaries, because at this moment there were many more missionaries, that missionaries would not stop until they got the support, and they would get the support of political power to impose Christianity to the locals. And so this third decision actually became the majority of people decision. Obviously, we can say that they were obliged to convert, and in a way, yes. But on the other hand, we know that 30% of people just left. A radical choice, obviously, because they had to leave everything. Not everything, but their life, their way of living. They had to migrate and to reconstruct their way of living in the neighborhood. But the third would be the third decision. It was better to become Christians soon, for sooner or later they would be, became also one of the reasons why the Portuguese stayed so long in Goa. So, but I would like to highlight what I consider that are three key factors in the policy of conversion and Christianization. Because these were three groups of people that the Portuguese political power and the missionaries really focused on. The first ones to focus on were the poorest people. Because the poorest people, in a way, well, at least theoretically in the beginning, were the ones that had more to gain. Because the poor people were given lands, the lands of those that fled away, for example, and they also were given this belief that with Christianity, the system of castes would be dissolved. So for the poorest people to convert to Christianity became an opportunity. They thought. Then we will see that things didn't happen exactly as these poorest people would like. But in theory, with Christianization would be more social mobility. Then another spot that from a moment onwards the missionaries were really focusing on were the village elites. And the legal framing I was referring before is very much related to this. The village elites were the ones that had more to lose, because were the ones that had more power, were the ones that lived better. And with the new legal framing, they would lose lots of privileges and lots of power if they did not convert to Christianity. because all this process was seconded by military power, So this was really a fearful situation and something that could really happen. And then the third I was already referring to, were the women. Because as I was telling before, the women, not all women converted to Christianity, but this huge number of women that converted to Christianity is also very interesting because of this legal framing and the possibilities that women have had to escape their condition. And we have, for the Goan case, the minutes of the assemblies of the villages from the end of 16th century onwards, and we can see lots of women, Catholics, new Catholics, women from these villages, interfering in the life in the village and making petitions, asking for property and lands, etc. What is also interesting to see the agency. It's a way. It's not the focus of my work, but a colleague of mine is one of these in the future work on this the agency of the women in this in the Goan villages, namely the women that have been Christianized. Okay, so which are the outcomes of this strategy that the Portuguese adopted in Goa? Okay, so I was saying, I'm repeating, but just to make it clear, so the socially disadvantaged groups in a way converted voluntarily, but in a way, voluntarily and pragmatically, because I don't think that in this period people converted genuinely to Christianism. I think the majority of these people converted pragmatically to Catholicism, to Christianism. So, and these socially disadvantaged groups saw the conversion possibility to improve their miserable condition. So then we have what I call intermediate groups, those that accepted the privileges given to those that converting, and expecting and sometimes obtaining mobility upwards. And this mobility upwards we can also apply for minority of the socially disadvantaged groups. And then the upper groups, they initially were the ones that resisted more to conversion, but after converting, they escaped from downgrading their status and wealth. And this third group, it's like it happened before. If you remember, I was saying in the beginning that the local elites were the intermediaries between the Vijayanagar power and the local people, or Bijapur Sultanate and the local people, and so on and so on. So these upper groups now became the main intermediaries between the Portuguese and the local people. What had a consequence that was that the caste system continued to operate in Goan villages, maybe not in such a strict way as in other places in India in this period, but the fact that these different groups, all of them converted to Christianity, allowed the resilience and the persistence of the social structure that existed before. Okay, so there was a kind of consent to Catholicism, and I would say that this consent had mainly social and economic reasons. It was all for different reasons. These people saw in converting to Catholicism either to ameliorate their situation or preventing of downgrading their situation. Okay, so now I wanted to alert you for the effects of everyday decisions. What do I mean by this? Is that, we do decisions every day for different reasons. Sometimes for pragmatic reasons, other times because we don't want, even when we do not act, we are somehow doing a decision. And what we can see in Goa in a very, very clear way is how everyday decisions, micro decisions, decisions that we're thinking about, how do I keep my power in the next month or in the next year, had what I call macro effects and long-term effects. So I would say that in the case of Goa is a very good observatory to see how these kind of decisions had a huge impact in the life of the Goan people, the people that inhabited Goa in the 16th century. So obviously these people were not aware that they would become westernized as they did, many of them. So as maybe we are not aware exactly of the effects of our everyday decisions. So, but for sure, if you remember this previous slide I've shared with you about the choices, there were people that were saying, yes, the Portuguese will not rest for long here, so let's pretend that we convert, but then everything goes back as before. So what was the imagination of these people in relation to the Portuguese? Probably the majority of them really did not expect that the Portuguese stayed so longer. Also because their immediate memory was of the Sultanate of Bijapur, that also did not stay longer. In parts of Goa, just for 20, 30 years, and other parts between 40 and 50 years. So you see, the immediate memory of what was a political domination of these villages was that the time length of the domination was short, was very short. So this imagination probably also allowed them to make some decisions, but without thinking, without forecasting what the longevity and the effect, the long-term effect, the structural effect of Catholicism in their lives. So we have the Christianization of the land and of the landscape. We have structural changes on demography and on identities. We have effects in the social structure. And mainly we have the durability of the Portuguese imperial presence there. Okay. So now just in the last part of my talk, I wanted to talk about the demography and geography of Christianization. So here you have from the differences in the demography of the Christians in Goa in this period. Well, if we think about mid-16th century, we have probably few thousand people that converted to Christianity, at least nominally converted. But by the end of the 17th century, they were more than 100,000. And in 1720, we have the statistics of the inhabitants of these three gray areas, and these statistics show that 91% of the inhabitants of Goa were at least nominally Christian. And I'm saying that because this is the process of Christianization or Catholicization of these people is a very long process. It doesn't happen from one day to another. What happens mainly is that next generations were already educated in the Catholic world, so they became Catholics. But so to be Christian, to be a Christian and to be a believer is these are two different things, and it took centuries in order to Catholicize the people of Goa. But then we have also a very interesting differences from village to village. This census of 1720 show that there are some villages, and I have here 3 villages of Goa, the numbers of 3 villages. In some villages, everybody identified themselves as Christians. In other villages, you had a very short minority that did not convert to Christianity. And in other, like this village of Oxel, that it's here, and it was in the northern part, you had like almost 50% of people that were still Hindus, if I can use the word for 18th century, in the beginning of the 18th century. So you can see that also the rhythms of conversion in these villages were different, and that also is explained by the heterogeneity of these villages that I was referring in the beginning. So the process that the Portuguese wanted of homogenization of these areas of Goa was partially successful. It was successful in certain places and was partially successful in other places. What is also very interesting to see. Okay, but again, there is no specific regional distribution because I put this hypothesis. Maybe the villages that are in the periphery in relation to the capital of Goa, they are less Christianized than the villages that are closer to the capital. And that could be a very good explanation, actually, because we can think political power is more effective in the areas nearby a capital, which is the seat of political power, than in the areas that are more peripheric in relation to it. But when we observe the case of Goa, there is no specific regional distribution, and also there is no specific correlation with the administration of some castes and not others in these villages. So, and I find this really very, very interesting, because this shows how the margins of freedom of the local people to convert or not convert, and this did not depend completely on political power and the grips of political power. I still don't have a good explanation for this, but I wanted to share with you these findings. Oh, I see now. Okay, wait. Now I see that this is an old version. Okay, I know. Yeah. Okay, I don't know what happened here. Okay. Okay, I don't know what happened. I just went to the. Okay, so I was here. Okay, so now this slide is about the impacts inside the village, and these are very huge impacts. First, that the Gaunkas were the name of the village elites. When they did not convert, they became unable to vote in the assemblies of the village and participating in the elaboration of the decisions. And also, all the Christians were, there was a Christianization of the village and of the land and of political power inside the villages. So non-Christians could not own slaves, they were prohibited of performing their religious ceremonies, they could not take part in the decisions. They could live in the village as non-Christians, but they were completely marginalized. So there is this strong Christianization of the village administration and of village life and the village wealth, let's put it in that way. Okay, but also the impacts of Christianization are different in each group. So the socially disadvantaged groups that I was referring before, which constituted the demographic majority, were never fully Christianized, let's put it that way. So there was a kind of hybridity in their belief between which were the Christian, Neo-Christian beliefs and the Hindu beliefs and practices. They kept speaking mainly in Konkani, even if the Portuguese tried to impose the Portuguese language, and they moved themselves very well between the two worlds, the local world, the previous local world, and the Christian world. And that's also an interesting point. It's these different levels of Christianization of these people, or the lower levels of Christianization. It was among them that were more conversions or reconversions to Hinduism in the 19th and 20th century. Because I was telling you, from the 18th century onwards, the pressure of the Portuguese power to convert almost disappeared in the same way as it happened in the 16th century. And in Goa, in the 19th and 20th century, you see a reversal movement, a movement of Hinduization. And you can see that the social disadvantaged groups that were the ones that were less Christianized are also the ones that engage with these new conversions to Hinduism. But it's true that even if they improved a little their social and economic condition, they kept their position in the lower levels of society. So the aspirations of the socially disadvantaged groups, when they engaged with Christianity to escape from their social condition, was frustrated. They kept, even if they lived a bit better than before, because the concept of untouchability in Goa did not operate in the same way as other places after the presence of Christians. They were never considered as equals. They could not aspire to equality, and that kept evident. That was quite evident in all this period. And then these other groups, the intermediate groups and upper groups, that was a smaller part of the demographic majority. Well, these groups were most of them landowners, members of the village elites, merchants, etc., financiers. We can find those that became more westernized. So they spoke tendentially. In the 18th century, you can find many of them speaking and writing in Portuguese. They were patrons of brotherhoods and Christian saints. Many studied in Goa, but also in Lisbon, and they dressed like Westerners and built houses inspired in Western architectural models. And in addition to that, they became a kind of internal colonizers of the Portuguese Empire. So they also became, many of them, agents of the empire. And again, this is another reason why the Portuguese rule lasts so long in this area. It was also because the local elites were converted not only to Christianism, but also to the political, at least for a certain period, to the political Portuguese political creed, let's put it that way. But in 1787, we have this conspiracy made precisely by these people that converted to Christianity in a more intensive way. They also shared these ideals of equality and liberty that in the 18th century were becoming more and more frequent in Europe. And so many of them, namely priests, Catholic priests of Indian origin, they organized this conspiracy to throw out the Portuguese from Goa. Well, it was a failed conspiracy because it was discovered before it happened. But the documents that we have of this conspiracy are also very interesting to show how the Christian creed also created the seeds of rebellion against the Portuguese rule. But I was telling you they did not succeed. Okay, so these are some images of this changing of local landscape, and also again these two images from the mid-16th century in which you can see locals already wearing like Portuguese, some wearing like locals, like Indians, but others already wearing like the Portuguese. Okay. What about the non-Christians? I was saying that in 1720 there were non-Christians, and they were the demographic minority, 90%, 9%. There were many of them were rich merchants and financiers, and their families and servants. And these ones, they were funding actually the Portuguese government. So they had a strong relationship with the Portuguese government. And because of that, and also because of the Portuguese government needed them to finance itself, they allowed them to keep their ways of living. And they had a bargaining power, so they had also some privileges in the sense that they could practice their religion without being not all of them, but the majority of them, without being punished by the Inquisition. So this was a very, very small group in this demographic minority. They were also a small group in this demographic minority, but they were the ones that kept their religion and could live in the Portuguese world without being too much impacted by this Christian rule. But they were impacted by this Christian rule, and we can see that in a very interesting rights controversy in the beginning of the 18th century, and we can see how these people are also interested in regional politics. So their belonging to the Portuguese Empire also could compromise their aspirations in regional politics in India. So there is a very interesting controversy that, if you want later, we can speak about it. But what about the other people that were not these elites, these very rich merchants and financiers? About them, actually, we have really little information because they didn't write, so they didn't leave documentary traces, so we can recover their lives under the Portuguese rule, unfortunately. So just to finish, so when we think about Goa, we are thinking about a place where the Portuguese had direct rule, which means if they had political power, these were conquered territories, and they had also military power. So there were lots. The violence which existed in Goa was they could have it because they had soldiers, they had the armies there, etc. And so they could impose Christianity. But this didn't happen in a similar way in other parts of India, where the Portuguese did not have political power and military power, or this power was very much shared with the other local polities. So either the Portuguese had indirect rule, or they have no rule at all. And this, how did missionary behave in these other places? And here we can see that the strategies of conversion are very different. They can, in many places, they negotiated much more, but also you have much limited conversions, because the political power could not impose in the same way they did in Goa, where the legal framing of the people living under the Portuguese rule was complete, and in these areas it was not. So but still we can see some impact on that. When in 1682 there were 14,120 Roman Catholics in the area of Bengal, and in 2016, 61% of Christians were Catholics. Many of them are descendants of these people that were converted in the 16th century. Others are new conversions, of course, but the presence is still impressive. And India is the second Asian country with more Christians in Asia, so that is also impressive. Even if in India the Catholics are just 1.3% of the total population, what is really very, very, very little. So I'm finishing now, and I will take also the PowerPoint, and this is just for you to have an idea about Catholicism in the world, and how India is among the countries with less Catholics in the world still today. So we have this social and cultural impact, but it's social and cultural impact in a very, very small minority. So this is some books that can help. There are lots of books on these topics, also in Portuguese, many of them. But this is just a sample of books that can help to go further in these topics. And so, thank you so much for your attention. I hope you didn't sleep while I was speaking, and that you could understand everything. And now I'm open for your questions to talk about this, and also your remarks on this topic. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am. I'm not sleeping. It's a very wonderful lecture, ma'am, and it's both enriching and wonderful lecture, ma'am. So now we will start our question and answer session. But before taking any question, I have one question of mine. May I ask you to directly, ma'am?
Yes, sure.
Yeah. So, ma'am, I am always interested in sources. So, I was thinking of listening to the lecture, and I was listening to the lecture. In what ways, ma'am, do the archival silences and the fragmentations within Portuguese colonial records obstruct or, manipulate the construction of Goan Catholic identity? And how do you methodologically navigate these absences without reproducing the same colonial epistemes?
Yeah, Ayush, that is a very, very good question that I was trying to address in the beginning. I have to tell you something. When I was doing my PhD, I couldn't read the Devanagari script in this period. So and I was speaking with Goan intellectuals about the remains of local writings in this period, and I had very interesting interactions with local intellectuals that were not Catholics, that were Hindus, and actually there are some manuscripts in Kerala that were brought from these people that abandoned the territory in the 16th century that I was referring to. Unfortunately, there are no transcriptions and real translations of these manuscripts, so I was unable to use them in that period, and that is for me one of the weaknesses of my work, because I still don't have access to these manuscripts that are in some temples in Kerala, and it's very difficult. I tried to find out how to access this material, but everybody says that there is, but it's not clearly enough for me until now where these manuscripts are and which stories they tell, and there is another important thing, which is to be sure that these manuscripts are genuinely from that period, which it's also another question, methodological question. So what could I do in order to not only reproduce the voice of the colonizer? That's more or less your question, no? What could I do? So what I tried to do was to depend less on the sources produced by missionaries. So usually the history of Christianity in India depends very much on the sources produced by missionaries. I also used these sources, of course, but I didn't give credit to the sources in the sense that I never believed that what they were saying was true, completely true. Obviously, there were things that were probably true on that, but for me, these sources, and namely the Jesuit sources were, for me, the ones that were less credible of all sources. And this was very much against the odds, because Jesuit sources are so many and everything. But what happened was, for me, it was clear, like the Jesuits had started just in this period. So Jesuits, it's a religious order that started in 1530s. So the Jesuits had to show off all the good things they did. So they would say much more better about themselves than any others, because they really needed that in order to be recognized in Europe as an important religious order. So what I tried to do was to focus as much as possible in what I consider was the administrative documentation. And why? Because administrative documentation, for practical reasons, tends to be more objective. So, like I was referring to these inventories of lands, what happened was the Portuguese decided that all the lands and goods belonging to the temples should be transferred to Christian hands. So what they did these lists of goods and lands and people that were associated to certain temples in order to be sure that they would be transferred to the Christian cult. So, and this practical goal of the Portuguese power, well, this is an imperial document, of course, but on the other hand, the practical goal of this document makes it more credible than other documents. So that's what I was trying to do, was looking for documents that, because they had these pragmatic goals, they were more credible than others. If I could escape completely the imperial episteme, I think I could not. Definitely, I could not. I have to be honest. I could not. It's how can I put it? I was like an object and the subject of observation, because I also belong to one of these families that have been Christianized. So this was also a kind of way of understanding how this process was going on, because I could observe in Goa today many of the things that I was trying to study and to understand the beginnings of this kind of behavior. So I don't have a better answer to you. It's today with the what also I was trying to do was looking as much as possible to what happened before the Portuguese. So this idea, I also inverted a bit what the people in Portuguese academia were doing, was they were thinking like, oh, the Portuguese went there and did this and this, that, as if there was nothing before. But what I tried to do was a bit the other way around, was to think what was there and how did these people that were living there perceived and interacted with the Portuguese that were the foreigners, and they were definitely the outsiders. And so that's the way I tried to do it. But it's not a perfect way, but it was the possible way. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. I'm just feeling why I'm posing this question, why I'm asking this, because I am now in Shillong, Meghalaya. So I am studying in Northeastern Hill University. So here we all know. So we all know there the traditional Khasi people, Jaintia people, and Garo people are there. And when the Christian missionaries came and they wrote about these indigenous people, and they use some very derogatory terms. But when the nationalist historians, nationalist school of historians write their history, I mean the Khasi history, or what I can say Garo history, they only use that the colonial ethnographers' language and colonial ethnographers' book. So that's why I'm asking now when the Portuguese came into the Goa and the tribal people also, what they kind of use their language and their sources is very important. Now to the revivalism is there now. They're writing their own history according to the oral myths and oral studies are here. So these kind of narratives are there. But
well, I forgot to tell you two things about the ways I try to avoid to have a very much Portuguese understanding. I was also using anthropology, anthropologist work on the local life, etc., and so on. Not only in Goa, but also in the surrounding regions. That was another thing I was trying to do because as I was saying, Goa did not exist as a homogeneous place in this period. It was part of a region, no? So since I didn't have so much documents for Goa, I thought that if I was looking to the region, and you have more documents for the surrounding regions of Goa, then I also could try to understand a bit more how Goa was in that period. So these were some strategies that I was using.
Thank you, ma'am. Now I'll take questions from our YouTube channel. So there is a question is asked by Arnav Rokhi. He's asking that to what extent can the use of categories like resistance in quote and accommodation in quote in your analysis be critiqued as products of colonial historiography themselves? And how do you ensure that such categories do not flatten the plurality of native responses to imperial religiosity?
Another very good question. Thank you. Yes, well, that's another thing we cannot escape from, which is the words we use to explain behavior. Because if we don't use categories, we can do it. We can decide to not use categories. But if we don't use categories, we just tell examples in a way. We just tell stories, believing that the stories also are true, which is not clear they are true. So what I was trying to do was with this, I was trying to using again the documents produced by the Portuguese, but I was trying to understand which were the origin of choices that the locals had. And yes, sure, resistance was surely what we can call a resistance. And I was doing a small work on the idea of consent, that whether we could use the idea of consent to early modern Goa in order to understand what these people that engaged with Christianity were doing. Were they consenting or not to the Portuguese rule? So I was, and to do it, for example, I was doing a search on the books we knew that circulated in Goa in 16th century, for example. So I was searching in Mahabharata, Ramayana, and this kind of narratives, what was the understanding of something similar to consent, in order to understand also what could be consent in the mind of Goans, of the inhabitants of Goa in this period. And the same happens with the idea of resistance, which obviously it's a concept that is very much Western-like. And what can we, how can we say that these people were resisting? What does it mean, resisting, basically? But the word resistance is very interesting also, because it's a word that means resisting. When we think about resisting today, we think about being against something, okay? While the word resisting in the Western vocabularies and the vocabulary in the 16th century, what did it mean, resistance? Was something that were able to continue, that was not to be against necessarily, but was to continue. It is something that has the ability to persist. That is what resists. That's what persists. And in that way, if we think about like the disadvantaged people of Goa that reconverted to Hinduism in 19th century, then these people resisted in that way, you know, even if they apparently lived under the Portuguese rule, their cultural structure resisted for longer periods. And that's a way of looking at resistance. That is not only to be against the Portuguese rule or the others. And I think we can find all these types of resistance in Goa. That can be, as you, and then we even can think that accommodation and resistance go together. In this way, these people can accommodate and at the same time resist. And I would say that the majority of people of Goa were in this type of behavior, that they, at the same time that they accommodated, they resisted, or their cultural world resisted the impositions of the Portuguese rule. I'm not sure that I've answered to your question, but that's what I can tell you now about this.
Thank you, ma'am. Now we will take our next question. It's asked by Ovinandita. He's asking theoretical questions. See, in light of Derrida's theory of difference and the instability of meaning, how do you interpret the linguistic and ritual translations involved in the Catholic missionary enterprise in Goa? And to what extent do these acts produce a hybrid colonial subject rather than a converted one?
Okay, very good question again. Yeah, that's the big problem. Is one of the biggest problems with these narratives and documents produced by in the context of the Portuguese colonial rule is precisely what you were pointing. First, incapacity of the majority of these Western people to transcribe and to translate the concepts that existed locally. Even if they were engaged very much in knowing local languages, as you know, namely the Jesuits, they were very much engaged in knowing the local languages. But if we see the Portuguese, and not only Portuguese documents, there is a myriad of words that they could not understand phonetically. And so they would transcribe into Portuguese as they would understand them, and then would become something completely different than the original words. The Portuguese documents are full of these misunderstandings. No, so like for example, they called Vijayanagar as Bijnaga. That was the word for Vijayanagar. So we have many of these misinterpretations of what the real words. And yes, I don't like so much the concept of hybridity, but we can use it to define the majority of Catholicism in Goa and in India. Yes, for sure. It's also because I have this understanding that conversion to Christianity, in a way, doesn't make sense, so much sense, in religious structures that are more cumulative than authoritarian, like at the Catholic Church. So that's why in my work I speak about conversion as a kind of almost administrative thing, which is you are baptized, then you are a Christian. This is a kind of administrative thing. And then I use the word Christianization. But when I say Christianization, I say that is something that results from education from the first moment in the Christian world, and also with the Christian vocabulary. That's why, for example, the missionaries that realized that very early, they teach to read to the locals with the catechism. So when you teach to read with the catechism, you are immediately creating in the imagination of the children that Christian world. And then so people are Christianized and they are not converted. And which means what? That the people that are educated in Catholic churches, schools, they maybe become full Catholics. But the people that don't have this kind of education and who continue to share their lives with people that were not Christians, then it becomes very difficult to become what the Roman Catholic Church says that is a genuine Catholic. So yes, hybridity is probably the best word to define Catholicism in the majority of cases in India. Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. I mean, this kind of what we were saying it's like the Gramscian model of the thing ideological apparatus, or the Althusser model of ideological state apparatus, or where the education and some culture policies are the most important thing to define and redefine our identity. So, and I can remember with the finest novel by Marquez, 100 Years of Solitude, is also showing the same kind of process. There was a village and some church, then education, then how they started the Christianization process, if I can say, the same thing. So that's it. And now we have so many questions, but for the time constraint, I will just take one more last question. That is asked by, you can't remember his name. Okay, just ask the question. He's asking that given the layered violence of epistemic domination embedded in colonial religious discourse, how do you reconcile your reliance on colonial archives with the ethical imperative to decolonize historical methodology? Can the master's tool ever dismantle the master's house in your reconstruction of Goan religious subjectivity? I think it's kind of same question what I asked in earlier.
Yes. Yes. It's very much related to what you have asked. Let me I have how to put it that way without being misinterpreted. I am a bit I question a bit this decolonizing category, decolonizing the archive, decolonizing the mind, decolonizing, etc. Just for this, and to make it clear, because first, I think this category is always related to Europe and to Western world. In a way, it's again, it's curious because the idea is exactly the other one, but it's again to put Europe in the center. It's the colonizing category is also a Eurocentric category. In what sense? Because in a way, it creates this idea that the Western colonialism really reshaped completely the world, and also the idea that if you decolonize, then you have a kind of genuine identity or genuine life or whatever. And I don't believe on that. I don't believe on that. I don't believe in genuine identity or essentialist understandings of history. I always see history as a process, and as a process that, as I was saying before, where everyday decisions, our decisions, we are making the world today with our micro decisions. Obviously, there are people with lots of power, like Elon Musk and so on. Obviously, they have much more power than we have. But we have micro powers also, and what is the world in the future also depends in our micro decisions today. Even if we are not aware of what the future will be, but we are building the future. This just to say that then if we can I decolonize the archive of Goa? I cannot, because that would be to say that 450 years of Portuguese rule in Goa was not part of that history in a way, and that if I was retiring all this, then I would have a real history of Goa. Well, but then you had to decolonize the Bishop Sultanate records, and then you had again to go to go back and say and decolonizing, because the word decolonizing finally for me it's about well, we use it to speak about colonial powers, the Western powers, but then we forget that other powers are also colonial powers in a way. And India was full of colonial powers before the Western powers arrived. Other powers, because were powers that were not well. You didn't have an India living under the same thing from thousands and thousands of years before. No, India was a subcontinent with different cultures, and then you have political powers that invade other territories and make people there subordinated. And then others come and do the same. So I don't. Yes, I think that we have to have a very critical understanding about how archives are produced historically, for sure. But I think, on the other hand, that is a kind of, if I can put it that way, a Asianization of history, if we consider that these parts of history that we don't like are not parts of our history, because actually they are, and you cannot escape from that. I mean, in a way, British Empire should not be like it had been, but it was. You cannot just take everything of British Empire and then say this was what India was, because then you have Mughal Empire, and then you have the different. Yes, how do you do? But yes, we have to have very critical understandings about how archives were historically constructed. Sure, and I try to have it. I have a huge reflection on archives, but I think it's impossible, actually, and I don't think it's good to suspend and this material produced in the context of the Western colonialisms and say, well, now we will find what is the truth. I don't believe that exists. I'm sorry. I don't believe that exists. What I can say, what can we do to counteract that? It's to recover the histories, like the Subaltern Studies School did, is to recover as much histories as possible. The histories that were not done, and there are many histories still to be done. And this is our, I mean, me as a historian, that's what I try to do, is to bring as many histories as possible to the historical stage, so we can have a more balanced understanding about the historical processes. And that's my answer. I'm sorry, again, not precisely maybe what you would like to hear, but that's what I believe.
Thank you